Good morning and welcome to the Treebinar, our Arbor Day webinar about safety and resiliency under the urban canopy. My name is Sam Lawson and I'm a community engagement specialist at New York City Emergency Management. Before we get started with our content, we're going to first just point out a few things on the platform. So first, at the bottom of the screen, you'll see certain icons. And one shows an overview of what we'll be discussing during this webinar. There's one with all of the resources and links that we'll be sharing during the presentations. There is the option to play the presentation. And then there's also a place where you can see all of our speakers and learn some more about them. Also at the bottom right, which I see a lot of you have already gotten access to, there is a chat window. Please do put your name and organization there. It's a great way to connect with other people. We also encourage you to put questions. We're going to save them until the end, and then we'll address them to the speakers. But please feel free to put them into the chat whenever you'd like. We'll just get to them at the end. So without further ado, a lot of you might be wondering, what do trees have to do with emergency management? Or perhaps why is New York City Emergency Management hosting an Arbor Day webinar? And of course, the most obvious answer is trees fall down, and that causes a problem in New York City. But during this presentation, we're going to answer this question a lot more in depth in terms of how do trees and how does this urban forest that we live in affect the hazard landscape of where we live? This is in line with New York City's mission, which is to help New Yorkers before, during, and after emergencies through preparedness, education, and response. So we do preparedness, like we're doing today. What do you do if a tree falls down? But we also do response. So when something happens, we respond. We're going to be going in depth during this presentation about that. And education. So we'll end on a note of what you can do in your community to let people know about how they can get involved in keeping our urban forests healthy. I do want to just note, we are always available to you, and you can always reach out to us at communityprep@oem.nyc.gov if you would like us to present or to come to your organization. Our objectives for this webinar. So first, as I mentioned, we want to connect our hazard landscape with our botanical landscape. What I mean by that is that we want to connect the hazards that we face, especially we're going to be talking about extreme heat and coastal storms, wind events, thunderstorms, etc., with the botanical landscape, our trees that we live in. Next, we're going to learn about what New York City does when a tree emergency happens. You might have seen us, people from the city come out and take a tree down or take it away, but we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about how that process happens and how you can be helpful in it. And then finally, we're going to determine action steps to increase tree safety. So we're going to be talking about what you can do in your community to make sure that your street trees are healthy and as healthy as they can be before something like a wind event happens. Of course, with the caveat that the wind, no matter how strong a tree is, can always bring it down. But we're going to talk about how you can make sure that your neighborhood is as safe as possible. Before we get into the presentations, this is the general outline for what we're going to be talking about today. First, we have Leanne Spalding, a senior policy advisor from the Mayor's Office for Climate and Environmental Justice, speaking about how trees help us in the battle against climate change and its effects in New York City. We'll have Lauren Smalls-Monte, an environmental systems analyst at New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, talking about how trees and public health are related, specifically around extreme heat. We'll have Jessica Einhorn, Director of Tree Preservation at New York City Parks, talking about how the city responds when an emergency happens, and that's something that is done in collaboration with New York City Emergency Management. And then finally, we'll have Nicole Henderson, a senior stewardship manager at Parks, talking about how you can get involved in making sure our trees are healthy. And with that, I will turn it over to Leanne Spalding to talk about climate change.
Great, thanks, Sam, and good morning, everyone. Let me just pull my screen. Presentation, bear with me. Great. Happy to be here this morning to talk about the importance of trees and the role of our urban forest as it pertains to climate change and climate risk. Ordinarily, I would open my presentation and tell you a little bit more about the Mayor's Office of Environmental Justice and what our mission is, but we are still under construction. What I will say is that we are the amalgamation of what was previously 4 independent environmental and climate offices under Mayor Bill de Blasio, which is the Mayor's Office of Sustainability, the Mayor's Office of Climate Resiliency, the Mayor's Office of Environmental Remediation, and the Mayor's Office of Environmental Planning and Coordination. We're now all under one umbrella, which is amazing. It gives us the ability to find great synergies in our work and collaborate in a way that reduces silos, but it also ensures that we're applying the lens of environmental justice and ensuring that our climate activities, programming, and policies are as human-centric as possible across all of our disciplines. But what we are doing and what we have been doing is researching, unpacking, and talking a lot about the climate hazards that face New York City. These are the 5 primary hazards. As many of us know, Superstorm Sandy gave us a lot of insight into what coastal storms and coastal flooding would bring in the future. We've talked a lot about sea level rise and have a number of massive construction projects underway that would leave us with walls that would protect coastal low-lying areas in Manhattan and other parts of the city. Ida, which happened just this fall, was a perfect example of a cloudburst event where we had an extreme amount of precipitation in a very short time with very damaging and sadly fatal consequences. And that was mostly inland flooding. I think we've talked a lot about extreme heat, but I'm definitely going to touch on that today, as that's one of the most fatal climate risks that we're facing. It's often the least understood and talked about. And then we are facing issues around groundwater table rise, which is exacerbating the coastal flooding that we're experiencing. However, we know that most weather-related fatalities, at least in our region, are already related to an extreme heat and likely will be moving forward. We know the New York City Panel on Climate Change is projecting that the number of days over 90 degrees is going to double by 2080, as you can see in the projection here. So we're going to be experiencing more extreme heat events than we have previously. A comparative point might be that by 2050, our weather might be closer to what's being experienced in Birmingham, Alabama currently. And that's going to be a big change for a population that's not acclimated to high heat events or hot weather generally, and we certainly don't have a building stock that was built for hot temperatures. A little bit of a kind of look at where we stand in terms of how heat is impacting public health currently. We know that there are roughly 350 heat exacerbated deaths already a year. Our population is roughly only 75% have AC units in their home that we know of. The remaining 25% are either without AC or may have limited access to AC or struggle to pay bills that would allow them to run a cooling system during extreme heat events. And extreme heat events in urban areas like New York City are exacerbated by a longstanding problem of urban heat islands, which make our dense populated city often 22 degrees hotter than surrounding suburban and rural areas. What that temperature experience can be like in a person's home could be upwards of 20 degrees hotter than it is outside without an AC. So there are a lot of compounding circumstances here. When we think about how to work on extreme heat, there are a number of variables that we take into consideration, and most of those variables were pulled into what we call the Heat Vulnerability Index, which is a really amazing and powerful tool that was developed by our wonderful partners at the Department of Health, and we're so happy that they could join us on this webinar today in conjunction with Columbia University. The HVI, as we call it, takes into consideration factors such as race, income, as well as surface temperature and vegetative cover. So we know that lack of vegetation or tree canopy in communities is correlated with higher temperatures. And so that's certainly one of the weighted variables that we look at. What you see here is a map indicating that, East New York, Central Brooklyn, South Bronx, Eastern Queens, and other areas that are really showing up as red, and the orange areas are where we have a high density of populations that are at high risk because of the confluence of these variables. That's about 3.4 million New Yorkers that are living in these high heat vulnerable areas. And we know that we didn't get here by accident, that there is a history that we have systemic injustice and racism that we have to acknowledge, and practices, and how communities have been planned, how mortgage loans and insurance have been given over the years that has led to certain communities being in housing and in communities that have been disinvested in over time, leading to poorer public health outcomes, but also they will be shouldering a greater burden as it comes to climate risk. As you can see that the areas where redlining has historically taken place tracks fairly well with where we have higher HVI areas. I would also say that if we were to overlay this, which we will do in our office at some point, with where we saw damage from Ida and inland stormwater, an extreme cloudburst and then flooding, that there is also a significant overlap between high HVI communities and where this flooding happened. We also know that our development patterns have contributed to this. So I would call your attention to the map on the right. That is a study we did with NASA that looked at 20 years of land surface temperature data, as well as some other variables in New York City. And as you can see, we have gotten hotter and hotter and hotter. We know that is to do with the fact that we've been paving over Paradise to put up a parking lot. We've lost a lot of vegetation over this 20-year period. We've changed our land use significantly. We've densified buildings. We've densified our industrial zones. We have a much more industrial processing that's producing waste heat, and a much more commercial traffic as well. And all of this is conflating to lead to higher temperatures over time. Yet again, just another factor that's going to exacerbate the climate risks that we're facing. Our office has taken the stance that we need to rethink how we're designing communities and planning communities and preparing New Yorkers, but also how we're investing in communities to help start to combat some of these adverse effects. Cool Neighborhoods, which was released in 2017, has been our primary tool of addressing extreme heat, and we have other policy plans that are on the way. We have the Climate Resiliency Design Guidelines, which are looking to help point at least city investments, but I think in the future private investments of how to build differently, include more green infrastructure, assess for heat risk and what adaptive measures they can take, as well as looking at other climate risks and how to better prepare and build in a way that both protects the asset, but more importantly, protects the people that are using these assets and living in and around these assets. Public health has certainly been a big focus in a lot of this work. And as such, a few of the major items that have come out of Cool Neighborhoods and thinking about the extreme heat piece, obviously has been to increase the amount of tree planting that is going on. I hope that you picked up on one theme, is that loss of vegetation is certainly contributing to the challenges that we're facing, specifically to the most burdened communities from at least extreme heat and the inland flooding perspective. As you can see on the left, these are some pictures that are showing just how much these investments can really impact a community, increase shade, the evapotranspiration from trees, and I'm sure that one of our future presenters will talk about a little bit more about that, helps bring down temperatures and reduce the impact of the urban heat island impact, but also keep communities cooler during extreme heat events and heat waves. And we want to see more densification of trees, certainly in our parks, and expansion of green areas. We've been able to plant over 20,000 trees in HVI areas, since the advent of this project. And in this upcoming fiscal year, we do have the budget available to move into HVI 4 areas and densify, planting of 20,000 more trees. I would say also that trees have a great co-benefit. Their root system and all the soil that will come along with these tree plantings, it means that there's a reduction in impervious surfaces, and we need to reduce the amount of concrete that's in the city. That will help soak up a lot of the stormwater that is flooding some of these communities, and make sure that we are ensuring that our landscapes are as spongy and green and cooling and absorbent of excess stormwater as possible, to help mitigate and both adapt to the climate risks that we will be facing in the future. And so to answer my question that I had on the first slide is, can trees contribute to how we adapt and mitigate to climate change? And the answer is an overwhelming yes. They are our friends, and we need more of them. And with that, I'm going to pass the presentation over to Lauren Smalls-Mante at the Department of Health to talk a little bit about the public health implications of urban forest and street trees. Thank you.
Hi everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm Lauren Smalls-Mante from the Department of Health. I'm an analyst there, and today I just want to talk to you a little bit about trees and health. So I wanted to start with my own experience when I first moved to New York, and I used to live on this block. And so this block in New York City and Harlem has around 16% tree canopy cover on the block. But actually, about a couple months after I started living there in the summer, it was the end of a heat wave, and I found myself going into heat distress. It was a railroad apartment. I had no AC, but I still had 2 fans going and the windows were open, but I was still in my apartment at night hyperventilating. And so initially my thought is, okay, I have to get out. Where am I gonna go? Like, what possible mechanisms do I have to reduce my heat stress or my heat load? Needless to say, as right after that, I went and got an AC because I realized that's crucial. But I do realize that I have the luxury of doing that, and some people do not. And we'll talk about that later in the presentation. But I also realized that this block is not set up for success. I was in this apartment here. It was, even though there's some trees down the street, I only received direct sunlight. So we're going to talk about how our building, or how our built environment, affects our public health. So trees benefit people in many ways. They build social connections, whereas it allows a place for people to gather. It allows people to reduce stress, whether it's through shade or through just seeing green space or vegetation relieves some of the stress because it's not a part of the built environment. It allows people to get active in areas where they may not have been able to get active, because it provides a safety buffer between cars and the other areas. It cleans the air through many processes, like such as reducing pollutants. And it, as Leanne said, it also cools spaces through shade and evapotranspiration, which are 2 things that I measure. So in New York City, we have a heat mortality report that comes out every year, and the website is below, so you can check out. On average, we see around 100 heat exacerbated deaths during the extreme heat period. So that is during heat waves and such. But we also see a lot of deaths associated with temperatures above 82 degrees. And 82 degrees might seem like a small number, but if we look at our heat mortality curve represented here, and this is the heat mortality curve for New York City using our data, you can see that people begin to be at risk for heat mortality clearly at 82 degrees and above. So while we do a really good job of warning people during extreme heat, during heat waves and stuff, people also should be aware that even at lower temperatures, you can experience heat stress and such. And why do we experience that heat stress? It is because our minimum temperatures are actually increasing at a higher rate than our daytime temperatures. So what happens when the nights are warm? When the nights are warm, your body does not have a chance to recover from the high period daytime temperatures. And so your body is actually stressed more than normal. So you can see in the New York period, this is this graph represents August 2020, so last summer. You can see that we're much above average in our minimum or nighttime temperatures. So this is not good. So what are some ways we can mitigate this? So Leanne already explained a little bit about our heat vulnerable index, which we created in New York City. But really, when you look at the heat vulnerable index, as represented here in the upper left-hand corner, you can see that the pattern exists in many different facets of our life, whether we're talking about heat waves, asthma rates, AC prevalence, even COVID cases, like the areas where we have high HVI is correlated to those areas. And so it goes again to what Leanne was saying, that we do, because of some of the systemic racial practices that were done in the past, like we have to work towards an equitable distribution of our heat mitigation and adaptation policies. So in New York City, as Leanne mentioned, we implemented the Cool Neighborhoods program, which started in 2017, and that included planting trees in high heat vulnerable neighborhoods. And so I was tasked with collecting air temperature in those neighborhoods so we can see direct effect, what the effects of the trees are on the neighborhood. So actually the block that I showed you in the beginning where I experienced my heat distress, which was 16% canopy tree cover, that block actually is in a high heat vulnerable neighborhood and is slated to get some trees. So we were able to collect a baseline temperature on that block, and we hope to in a couple of years measure again and see what effect the trees had on the block. But we did do some monitoring, some baseline temperature monitorings in the air, and you can see that the distribution of temperature in the neighborhood, so the lighter orange are the higher temperatures and the darker purples are the lower temperatures. The distribution of temperatures in New York City is spatially different. And even if you look from block to block, so the lower right-hand corner, you can see the block to block differences are different. And that's really the effect of the built environment and the tree canopy distribution on the neighborhood. So we studied this in order to see what percentage of trees reduces the block to block differences in the neighborhood by this much, so we can create a better environment for New Yorkers. So if you see these temperature monitors on your trees or light poles, just, we're in your neighborhood and we're just collecting measurements so that we can better the area. We've also done a couple heat mitigation adaptations in the Bronx, so on some plazas, and this is one of the plazas which we did during the summer in South Bronx. And so we did some temperature monitoring, and we compared the under a tree canopy, an area with no tree canopy, and that installation had a misting station. So you can see, which was pointed out here, that the difference between the red and the green and the green, which is the difference between the no canopy and the canopy, is about a 4-degree difference. And this actually really helps. So shade, which is provided by the tree canopy, really helps out on those hot summer days just by reducing the air temperature that much. And these are single trees. So like the street trees that you see in the right of way, like in front of your house. But when you actually have aggregate formations of trees, like what you see in a park or maybe on a NYC campus or something, you can see that even an aggregate tree distribution of trees reduces the temperature even more. So goals are to have full blocks of trees with overarching canopies to create that canopy layer and reduce temperatures even more than the individual street trees. So if you're interested in any of our data, or neighborhood reports or data stories, they're available on our environmental health and data portal. Our neighborhood reports, you're able to type in your neighborhood and you're able to explore variables such as temperature, AC prevalence, air pollutants that are we measure air pollution. So you're able to see that. A lot of different variables, things that affect your neighborhood. We have data stories about heat or urban heat, air pollution, the effect of COVID on air pollution, other data stories if you're interested to check on our portal. So that's it. And I guess we'll take questions at the end. And so I pass it on to the next person. Thank you.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Jessica Einhorn, and I serve as the Director of Tree Preservation for New York City Parks. I want to extend a thank you to New York City Emergency Management for hosting us all to celebrate Trees and Arbor Day, and thanks to you all for joining this presentation. For the next few minutes, I'm going to share some information about the New York City Parks forestry storm response. I'll cover the preparation work that we do year-round to minimize storm damage. Then I'll describe what a typical storm response looks like. I'll discuss a bit about which trees fall under Parks' jurisdiction. And then lastly, we'll discuss the important role that you play to help us out in the aftermath of a storm. So just earlier, Lauren Smalls-Monte and Leanne Spalding excellently covered the benefits that our urban trees provide. And there's an impressive number of trees across the 5 boroughs, and New York City Parks is directly responsible for over 3 million forest trees, over 666,000 street trees, and over 156,000 park trees. Our non-forest trees are the ones that we are actively maintaining because they share close quarters with all of us. So storms are unpredictable by nature. We've got several mechanisms in place to maintain our street and park trees throughout the year, which helps us minimize risks during a storm. For one, we have a block pruning program that aims to prune every street and park tree on a 7-year cycle. This regular maintenance includes the removal of dead branches and the pruning of limbs that hang low over streets and sidewalks, or limbs that may be touching adjacent buildings. We also manage certain pests and disease, such as emerald ash borer and Dutch elm disease, in an effort to mitigate these threats to the urban forest. These types of routine tree work help to maintain a healthy and resilient urban forest that's less susceptible to damage during a storm event. We also have foresters and tree work crews working year-round, utilizing our risk management framework to prioritize tree work that they have categorized as high or extreme risk. In order to gather these data, we have trained staff who identify tree defects and assign a risk rating by answering the following questions. They ask themselves, what is the likelihood of a tree or a tree part failing within the next year? What are the strike zones and potential targets of the tree or the tree part? And what would the consequences be if the tree or the tree part were to fail? And this type of approach puts us in the most secure position heading into a storm. When severe weather is actively impacting the city, our partners at NYPD and FDNY respond to life-threatening emergencies. The individuals at these agencies are trained to work in dangerous conditions and are authorized to be out on the roads. As soon as conditions are safe to deploy our staff into the field, we send out our inspectors who respond to 311 service requests that come in from the public. And our tree work crews start by responding to confirmed conditions, and they begin the cleanup. Our inspectors travel to the location provided in the service request and assess the situation. If warranted, they create a work order with an associated risk rating, which is automatically entered into our forestry management system. These work orders will dictate where the tree work crews will be dispatched to attend to situations in need. So when storm damage occurs, we use an additional prioritization framework to attend to life safety associated work orders first. If a building entrance or exit is blocked or someone's life is at risk because a tree has fallen on their house, the work is prioritized. Similarly, if an emergency response vehicle cannot pass a street because a tree is blocking the way, the job site is also prioritized. There are also situations where tree failures come in contact with utility wires. If you encounter a situation where utility wires may be compromised, first thing to note is to stay clear of the area because it could be electrified. Don't approach any downed wires. Move away immediately and call 911. Parks works in coordination with Con Edison to attend to situations where power may need to be shut off before tree work can be initiated, or we may send a contracted crew who is certified to safely perform tree work around live wires. In the past few decades, we have had a handful of storm events that have brought down limbs and trees that required a significant effort to clean up. Superstorm Sandy resulted in over 20,000 individual tree work orders. This was a combination of fallen trees, fallen limbs, and hanging limbs. Tropical Storm Isaias required crews at over 11,000 individual storm damage sites. Both were some of the most extreme tree damage events that I've experienced here in the city, and we expect these intense storms to increase in frequency. It's especially interesting to note that the number of service requests that came in during Tropical Storm Isaias, which is represented by the blue diamond here on the graph, was triple the number of work orders that were created. And that's a sign that we as New Yorkers have more resources at our fingertips to assist in the storm response effort. And I'll touch a bit more on that in a moment. So in major storm events like the notable storms I just mentioned, the response requires resources that exceed our normal forestry staffing capacity. We have scale-up mechanisms in place so we can respond appropriately. We start off with the folks who do this type of work every day. We've got our forestry inspectors, our climber pruners, and our supporting office staff. Our first scale-up allows us to pull resources from other divisions within the agency and activate our emergency contractors to boost our response. And when we experience an all hands on deck situation, our partners at Emergency Management assist with the sharing of resources from partner city agencies, utilities, and tree work crews from other regions. In order to effectively coordinate these external resources in a large-scale storm event, our partners at Emergency Management convene the Downed Trees Task Force. Activating the task force provides us with a platform to coordinate and assign additional resources to areas in need throughout the city. And through this sharing of resources, we're able to respond to major storm events effectively and efficiently. So I just snuck in this slide to quickly discuss which trees are the responsibility of New York City parks. During both storm response and normal operations, there's often some confusion in this area. So generally, it's parks' responsibility to maintain trees on public streets, New York City parkland, traffic triangles, medians at malls, and parkways. And we do not maintain trees on private streets, state and federal parks, other public land, private land, and expressways. So for instance, if a tree falls in a private backyard, New York City Parks does not perform the cleanup. Although a small caveat in this situation, if the backyard tree has fallen and is blocking the public right-of-way, the city will clear the blocked passage up until the private property line. So let's discuss how the public can help during a storm event. As I mentioned earlier, your 311 service requests largely guide our storm response effort. If you see tree damage, put in a 311 service request by calling. You can use 311's app or their online intake, or report a problem through New York City Parks Street Tree Map, which is linked as one of the resources here in the presentation. It's very important that the location be logged accurately so the inspectors can find the condition, so please provide an exact address if you're able. Here's a little snapshot of our New York City Street Tree Map. And by using this to report a problem, the service request that's generated is associated with the specific tree that you select, which is helpful for the inspector to find the reported condition. And we're rolling out a new system this storm season where inspectors will affix New York City Parks inspected tape to trees that have already been looked at. If you see this tape, you can know that a work order is in queue for a crew to attend to, and you don't need to call in an additional service request. So to show you how essential your assistance is, these are maps that show the geographic spread of hazardous tree-related 311 requests. We really rely on you to communicate to us where tree work needs to be attended to. As you can see in the example on the top right from the tornadoes that blew through in 2010, the 311 data provides a very accurate track of where the tornadoes caused damage throughout the city. With that said, you can see how the general public is a crucial partner in our storm response effort. And thank you so much for listening. I'm going to pass it along now to Nicole Henderson to talk about stewardship.
Hello, everybody. Give me one moment. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Really looking forward to speaking with folks today about the New York City Park Stewardship Team and ways that you can stay engaged in supporting our street tree and urban forest before a storm. And so my name is Nicole Henderson. I'm the manager of the NYC Park Stewardship Team. My team essentially manages and supports community volunteers in caring for green spaces all throughout New York with a focus on our street trees in our natural areas. I really love this photo before I start hitting all of my talking points. These students have just finished a street tree care event with one of our staff. The event was hosted in central Brooklyn. You can see it was a little bit chilly outside, but the students contacted our team and we went out and really kind of gave them the how-tos and some skills in caring for their young street trees that they hopefully will share with their families afterwards. And despite the fact that they were outside working on a cold day, still full of many, many smiles. So a little bit more about our team, the NYC Park Stewardship Program, and we have some links that will drop in where you can find information about our events. We essentially began post Million Trees. There was a lot of interest during Million Trees around that 2005-2015 period in connecting with community volunteers. It wasn't necessarily about just getting trees into the ground, but how would these spaces thrive afterwards? And our community partners were a very big part of that. And so this photo montage kind of describes how we do that. The young woman in the top corner is planting a tree. And so not only do we care for street trees in the right of way, we're also planting in our natural areas year round, usually through the spring and fall. And you can find lots of events on our calendar if you're interested in checking those out. The top pictures show folks in action focused on street tree care. And so we're training community volunteers so that we can do this work on their own time as well. With that photo to your right, that has a staff member in a truck. That's not just any parks truck, it's called a Treebinar truck. And so really emphasizing that we can come as best to our ability with a staff member, mulch and tools directly into communities and neighborhoods. So that way folks can learn these techniques and continue these improvement practices on their own time. And then below, we have some of our natural area pictures in events, folks removing invasives, improving trail projects and things of that sort. I really like to take a moment. Our team is really fortunate where we are working right on the streets of New York City. Sometimes talking to community and folks, as we're shoveling mulch right from the top of the bed of our truck and instructing folks. And then also going into our natural areas. And so really there's a connectivity to these spaces and what our street trees are doing and the benefits that our earlier presenters discussed, but then also how that connects in a larger context to our watershed, our coastal areas, and our buffers. And so my team really supports community engagement in all of these spaces. This slide really quickly just has a map of the street tree population. These numbers are from 2020. Jessica had mentioned the street tree map, which actually has sort of lifetime data. And so I think that although that number says 692, I think if you look now for our street tree map for today, it'll actually say 689 because there are changes in our street tree population, often due to storms. And so also kind of falling in line with some of our earlier presenters talking about sort of heat vulnerable communities and where some of these concentrations and pockets of green moving forward and sort of showing that change in time of that orange to that dark green of where we want to see more trees over time. This slide also provides some of those extra benefits because that tree map, if you take a look at it and take a moment and feel free to share with your networks, it's right on the parks website, that actually also shows us the cost benefits that trees give back. So we know the social, but it is nice to sometimes see in that black and white the other ways that trees benefit our communities. This study is a really nice pause. And so if I say anything today in terms of what you may tell family, friends, coworkers, colleagues, it really is that the stewardship and care matter. There was a research project that took place during Million Trees that looked at 4 signs of stewardship that helped increase our trees rate of living and livelihood. So decrease mortality, increase how long they'd live. And so those 4 signs, very simple. A sign near a tree, just saying that someone cares. Plantings in a tree bed, same thing. A lot of folks don't realize that you can put plants into a tree bed. You don't need a permit. And we also have a list on the parks website of good plants that can go into a tree bed, maybe even taken and purchased from our Greenbelt Native Plant Center in Staten Island if you're interested in trying some native species. Also mulching beds, if you're able to secure mulch in a tree bed, in addition to removal of trash and evidence of weeding, helps increase a sign of stewardship, helps increase a tree's rate of livelihood. So these are very simple things that really anyone can do. And so this is what my team does. We will go out into the field and also we host webinars, and feel free, those links should also be on that website, and I'll have my email address in case people have questions. Very simple steps when we go out. We're removing litter, we're removing weeds. Our goal is to cultivate and aerate the soil. If able, we're putting down a layer of mulch. We do that even in the winter. People are like, why are you doing that? But, protecting salt and from damage that our trees can see. And then the summertime kind of protection to help keep moisture in an extra layer. So mulch is really great if you're able to access. We also encourage anyone who's working on the tree beds to record their care. It's a really great way of us knowing what's going on the ground. And that can also be done through the NYC Park Street Tree Map. And a lot of these steps to care and these signs of stewardship, when we're thinking about storms, they make our trees stronger. So whatever actions, and not crazy actions, even if we're talking about aerating the soil, a lot of folks don't realize that even a subway train over time going under a tree bed can compact the soil and remove air. But these steps that we can take, whether it's getting rid of the weeds, Saturday morning walk, maybe picking up some litter that's in your tree bed, can help increase their life and also their strengths, making them less vulnerable to storm impact over time, and also increasing the amount of ecosystem services that they can give back to us within our community. So these are some pictures of before stewardship and after stewardship. And so it really does, it makes an effect, walking down your community and down your neighborhood and sort of seeing these tree beds versus the others, in addition to those increase in ecosystem services. We instruct volunteers on cultivating the soil, so making sure we can get some air into that soil. In addition to mulching, my team loves to talk about, we love mulch donuts. The only time we say we love donuts versus mulch volcanoes. And those are tips and techniques that we talk with the volunteers about when we're on the ground or in some of our web-based tools. This is just a quick snapshot and photo of the volunteers we're working with. Our team is really fortunate. Stewardship and care of our urban forest is our bread and butter. That's what we do. And so essentially, if we are not on the ground preparing for an event, which you should be able to see on our calendar, something going on almost every weekend in a variety of spaces all across the 5 boroughs, and then we are hosting events, and those will happen Tuesday through Saturday. Our partners will include youth groups and school partners. Sometimes we connect with bids. There are a lot of community parks and organizations who we collaborate with to help extend their footprint. Folks who are like working out of the Coney Island Creek, like Coney Island Bed Beautification Project, where they have this beautiful waterway, but also a large swath of young street trees that need care to help increase the services and create those buffers for partners. So our volunteers really all across the city, and we connect with everyone. I do want to pause actually, because both Lauren and Leanne mentioned heat vulnerability index and HVI. And I just want to say, like, when we select our sites, particularly our street tree care events, we are also looking at those metrics. And so we want to prepare for these locations where trees might be coming in, to potentially help create a base of volunteers who know what they have to do and know what they can do to support these spaces, so we can give long, thriving trees for as long as possible. And so feel free to direct anyone to these websites and web pages. You can find anything on the New York City Parks website. Just click on opportunities and it'll take you to our stewardship page. If you are looking on this slide in the upper deck, it says be a super steward, and that's where you can find some of our online presentations where we host these street tree care pieces. We recognize that our schedule, there's only so much we can do. And so we do our best to try and put as much of that information, resources, and power back into the hands of folks who are working directly on the ground and have the best knowledge of their communities. And so whether you're learning at one of our events, and just feel free to pop in, or you want more information and more resources in terms of becoming a super steward, a more care captain who's more focused on these street tree pieces, we try and provide all of those resources as best as possible. Leanne actually had these photos in one of her earlier slides, but I am still going to just share, and this is the last 3 photos that I have, because we have been working in East New York for almost the past 10 years, trying to increase the street tree stock as best as we can, but also coming back for care. And so this picture, I think, is just a really great, these sets of photos are just really great examples of sort of the before and after. With that being said, a lot of the street trees also are being cared for in that 5-year period. So it's really great. So this is the before: no trees, no relief, no buffers from storms, no natural air conditioning, any of the sort. Trees have gone in because the sites have been identified as very vulnerable within our communities. And then you have 5 years later, sort of the differences that are happening with our teams kind of going in with this particular swath and going and supporting street tree care with community members along the way. So that is it for me today. Thank you all so much, and such a great panel. I'm looking forward to questions.
Thank you so much to all of our presenters today. Now we're going to take questions. I know we have a lot of questions, so hopefully we can get to yours. But I do want to start with just some of the easier ones to get them out of the way. We are recording this. It will be available at the same link you registered at, so you can see the recording and access all of the resources which are at the bottom of the page. I think our most common question and what there's been a lot of discussion about in the chat is about coastal resiliency projects and how they impact street trees. So in particular, East Side Coastal Resiliency and some of the NYCHA campuses like the Baruch houses and the Red Hook houses, where the things we're doing to protect against climate change can also lessen tree cover. And so there was kind of a lot of conversation about that, but maybe we could talk about some of the things the city can do to mitigate those actions or things that is being done and what the position of the city is. And whoever wants to take that first can. I'm not sure who's in the best position.
I have a feeling I probably should take a crack at this question. You know, I wish someone from our coastal resiliency team was here because I think that they could give a lot more detail, but I know in any case where there's a disturbance with some of these coastal resiliency projects, we're always looking to offset that disturbance. So if trees are removed, it's always done under the auspices that there will be a replanting or densification in another area. And, you know, we always take the factor into consideration of, you know, what location that, you know, where that tree density loss is happening, and trying to figure out, you know, with the community where additional plantings or green infrastructure could be increased. I know that, you know, Parks is involved in many of these conversations as well. We try to be incredibly thoughtful about it, but, you know, I would just say, you know, this is a tremendous shift that we're making. You know, and climate change is one of the biggest existential threats we're going to be facing, you know, as a society and as a species, and we're going to have to undertake some really big projects that are going to change and shift fundamentally the way that, you know, we live and we operate in the city. You know, but we have to move forward with these projects, but we at once also have to balance those ecosystem implications. And we're always committed to not detracting from greening or subtracting from our urban canopy, but adding to it at all costs at all times. So, you know, I don't mean that to be a very vague answer, but, you know, I can't sit here and say, look at the loss of tree canopy that is contributing to this crisis, and then say that we're putting up projects but turning a blind eye to the fact that we may be undercutting other ecological systems. No, we're trying to figure out what that right balance is in partnership with the experts at Parks and other agencies.
And I will just add that, you know, we take this tree loss very seriously, and we do have laws in place and very specific protocol where we're not allowing a large mature tree to be removed and just replacing it with a small, you know, young tree. We are ensuring that the full benefits of the tree are ultimately replaced, but we do recognize that that takes time.
Thank you for that. And again, like I mentioned in the chat, I'll be in touch with everyone who mentioned more in-depth questions. I know it's hard to get to in just a couple of minutes, and we want to make sure we have the right folks. Another question we got related to trees was, what is the wait time for a street tree if you request it, and how, and my question is also, how do you request a street tree?
Happy to jump on this one. Nicole, please add in anything that I may have missed. So the best way to request a street tree is through 311, some of those resources that I mentioned in my presentation. It does take some time. Once the request comes in, we have an inspector go out and look at the location and see if it's viable for tree planting. And then if it is viable, it gets assigned to one of our contracts. They have to go and, with the contractor, mark out the area, and then construction takes place. The trees have to be procured, and dug up and then planted. So it is often a couple seasons, and we do recognize that's, takes some patience, but 311 is the best way to get that process started.
I just wanted to piggyback and ask Jessica, so what if the tree's been planted and under 2 years the tree has died? So what's the procedure for that?
Great question. So we do have our foresters go back and inspect the trees at the end of the guarantee period. So they will automatically go back and see whether or not that tree has sustained some damage or has died. And we do have guarantee periods on those trees for 2 years where the contractor will go back and replace the tree. But feel free, always, we encourage everyone to put in a 311 request if you see any damage or if the tree has died.
And just to be clear, that includes empty tree beds, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Great. And another question we got was around signage. So should people put their own sign on street trees, or should they be using some sort of sign from the Parks Department?
I can take that one. You can use your own signage. You don't necessarily have to have official signage, just making sure it is appropriate. And we actually, that's a really not a high risk activity to increase visibility and engagement around your street trees for your community. One of my favorite signs I've ever seen is Jaden's ginkgo. Jaden was like a young child who lived in a building before, in the building, and he grew with that tree, and people knew not to mess with Jaden's ginkgo. And that love and ownership in the community. So you don't need official signage. If you join our Super Steward program, I do think we have some signage that we're able to give out to folks, but it costs. Sorry, you don't have to pay. So we have to pay. So we're limited in what we can give you. So that's why we really encourage folks to get creative and build that ownership and that curbside wall of beauty with your signs and flowers.
Thank you. And another 2 questions we got. One was around, are there any current pilot projects people can get involved with, or are there paid youth internships? Maybe just some of the other ways people could get involved.
I'll quickly talk. We're trying to launch some additional projects. And so hopefully by the fall of next year, you may see something in regards to native planting and other sites. So please check out our website. I will say that we are growing things out. And so even in the past year, there are more opportunities to connect with some of our nurseries and potentially secure material. So also take a look at that on our website. In terms of youth, like I said, we are working Tuesday through Saturday. If there are youth counselors that you know of, or youth partners and facilitators, and I really want to focus on people who can help and support facilitate, we can train them. So we have some opportunities where folks can join in on events. We are sometimes able to onboard summer youth employment folks, but I really have to say the best way is, even if you know of a local bid who might be working with a group of youth for this summer, we can host a training, we can drop off material so that way they can do that work that they know best on the trees in their community.
I just wanted to add, if you're on a NYCHA campus, NYCHA has a program and is currently running a program now. I don't remember the exact name, but if you contact me, I can get the name of the program.
Another question we had was, is there a law around scaffolding damaging trees, and are they required to replace them?
Oh, great question. I will fully admit this is an area that we need to focus in a little bit closer on. We have been aware of the issues of scaffolding and trees. They generally don't like each other for some time. And we are working with Department of Buildings and Department of Transportation to see if we can pilot some new opportunities so that we are not seeing so much damage to the trees, and also providing the safety to the pedestrians walking underneath that's required.
The last question I'll take, I do want to respect everyone's time. It is noon, was around other benefits of trees. Do trees benefit stormwater, and do they help to capture stormwater? And the same thing was true around how do trees, or was asked around how do trees impact air quality?
I can start off with that. So trees do impact or capture stormwater more so because you're replacing impervious surface with pervious surfaces. So it's able to capture more of the stormwater. In New York City, we have a suite of different nature-based solutions, including tree pits, but some of those tree pits actually store more stormwater, and they're called rain gardens or bioswales because the soil is a different type of soil that allows for more water to be captured and stored. The impacts on air pollution, it does also contribute to air pollution reduction, but also like was Nicole mentioned, like a healthy tree is going to give your best benefits. So if the tree is not healthy and is not being taken care of, those benefits such as the cooling benefits or the air pollution benefits aren't going to be to its maximum. So it's really important that you take stewardship and to take care of the trees that are in your neighborhood so you receive the maximum benefits from the tree. So if you, so we do have stuff on our website, on our Department of Health website, if you're interested in like specifics, like pollutants and such on our environmental health and data portal. I believe there's a data story on it.
Great. And I know we had a few more questions, but I do want to cap it there. We'll be in touch. And again, if you have anything that we weren't able to get to, you can email us at communityprep@oem.nyc.gov. Thank you so much to all of our speakers who volunteered to be here. And thank you so much to everyone who joins. And happy Arbor Day and happy spring, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Happy Arbor Day.
Happy Arbor Day.